Welcome to your first video lesson. This one is on adding and subtracting decimals. So we talked about in class, you're going to put your title up at the top, put today's date, and then your essential question is, why is the decimal point so important when I add or subtract decimals? So feel free to pause, get this information in to start your notes like you will in every single video, and then we'll go on to the next part. Now, coming from elementary school, there's a good chance that a lot of this is a review. You might be rusty at it, you might remember it, but it's one of those that we want to make sure we really have down. So even if you feel pretty comfortable with it, you're still going to take your notes and you're still going to go through the examples with me throughout the video. So up at the top of your notes, that big main section, start with our heading, how to add or subtract decimals. And we basically have a three-step process. First, line up the decimal point. This is probably the most important part in the whole problem. If you don't line up that decimal point, you're never going to have a chance of getting that answer correct. Then we can add some extra zeros to the end of the numbers as needed. We always want them to have the same number of decimal places. And then we just go ahead and add or subtract. The decimal point is just going to slide straight down into our answer. So I just kind of think of it as an arrow, kind of drops straight down as we go. So our first one here is 45.67 plus 6.7. So you're going to jot down this example and we're going to line it up together. Remember, you're going to line up your decimal point. So I'm going to grab this one and slide it over until that decimal point lines up. I want my ones to add to my ones, my tenths with my tenths, my hundredths with my hundredths, and so on. So here, I'm going to add an extra 0 since that number is a little shorter. And then always check to see what kind of a problem am I doing. Well, I'm doing an addition problem. So 7 plus 0 is 7. 6 plus 7 is 13. So I'm going to carry the 1. 1 plus 5 is 6. Plus 6 is 12. Carry my 1. 1 plus 4 is 5. And then that decimal is just going to slide straight down into my answer. I get 52.37, or 52 and 37 hundredths, which makes sense. I'm adding 45 and 6, so that's about 51. So it makes sense that my answer is going to be around 52. Next one, same idea. We're going to take the second number and we're going to slide it underneath until it lines up with the first number. Okay? Whenever one is longer than the other, we're going to go in and add in our extra zeros. And then again, it's an addition problem. So you're just adding down each of the columns. 0 plus 7 is 7. 0 plus 0 is 0. 8 plus 6 is 14. Some people will just go ahead and slide that decimal down right as they're going through it so they can't forget it. 1 plus 9 is 10. Plus 5 is 15. Carry the 1 and we get 25.407. Okay? A quick way of checking is to do the problem in reverse. Do 25.407 minus 15.607, and you could work your way backwards and see, do I really get 9.8? So now for subtraction. For subtraction, it's even more important to make sure to add those extra zeros before you have to do any of it. And a lot of time we're going to need to do some borrowing. But otherwise the rules are the same. We want to make sure that we line up those decimal points in our two numbers to make sure all of our place value lines up. That decimal point is all about making sure the place value lines up. Okay? So I'm adding my ones are going to be together, my tenths, my hundredths, my thousandths. I'm combining together, or in this case subtracting pieces that are all the same size. So I'm going to subtract my thousands. 8 minus 4 is 4. 7 minus 6 is 1. 3 minus 6 I can't do. I can't take 6 away from 3. So I'm going to do some borrowing. Remember, we come to the number next door and we borrow one of them. And that becomes a 10. So that 10 gets added to my 3 to become a 13. If you're okay writing the 1 there, that's fine. Other people like to just rewrite it as a 13 up top. Whatever works best for you. 13 minus 6 is 7. Our decimal slides down. And 3 minus 2 is 1. The hardest thing to make sure you're careful of is if it's a subtraction, don't accidentally add them. Always check what kind of a problem is it. Make sure you do the correct operation. So let's see another one. 12.8 minus 3.675. So I'm going to slide it down and line up the decimal point. Notice I didn't slide it over so that it was even on the right-hand side. I didn't slide it over so it was even on the left-hand side. The only thing that matters when I line it up is that decimal point. The rest of the numbers just slide left or right until it matches up with the problem I'm doing. Here, I'm going to add in my extra zeros up top. Sometimes when those zeros aren't there, you're tempted to just let the 5 and the 7 slide down, but of course that doesn't work when you're subtracting. Here, I want to do 0 minus 5, but I can't, so I'm going to go next door. There's nothing to borrow here, so I'm going to have to come all the way to the 8 to do my borrowing. So that's going to become a 7, so that this one can be a 10. Now there's enough there that I can borrow from there in order to make that one into a 10. Okay? You might be a little rusty on that one. You have to go a couple numbers down in your borrowing, but we'll practice that. 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 7 is 2. 7 minus 6 is 1, and our decimal slides down. And then I have 2 minus 3. Well, I can't do that, so I'm going to go and borrow. And it becomes a 12 minus 3, which is 9. For some of you, you might have been taught a just slightly different way of doing your subtracting, and that's totally fine. Back when you did that initial subtraction, or when you did that initial borrowing, since you couldn't borrow here, some people will go, okay, and think of this as a 80. They'll think of it, okay, I want to borrow from my 80, which makes it a 79, which lets that 1 come over here to do my subtracting. If you use that method instead of going number by number, I'm totally okay with that because we still get to that same answer of 9.125. We are almost done. Sorry, I jumped ahead on myself there. So last one is what to do when one of the numbers doesn't have a decimal in it. It doesn't mean there isn't a decimal. It doesn't mean you ignore the decimal. Sometimes you have to write in the decimal in the number itself. So the good rule of thumb is when your whole number is a decimal, the decimal really goes at the end of the number over on the right. So my example is $23 is really 23.00. That decimal goes on the right-hand side, and then I can add in those extra zeros. So same thing down here, 6 minus 3.74. I'm going to write 6, but I'm going to write it with the decimal. That decimal goes right at the end of my number, and I'm going to add in 2 zeros because there are 2 decimal places in my other number. So I'm still lining it up so that decimal point lines up nicely. I can't do 0 minus 4, and I can't borrow from here, so I'm going to come over here and borrow from my 5 and make this a 10. And I'm going to borrow from the 10, which turns to a 9, so I can make this one into a 10. It's all about that place value. 1/10 gives us those 10 hundredths that we can use. 10 minus 4 is 6. 9 minus 7 is 2. Decimal slides straight down. And then 5 minus 3 is 2. So we get 2.26. Same thing on our next one. 28 minus 15.183. 28 doesn't have a decimal, so I'm going to add it in. It's always at the end of the number. When I line up my problem, I'm going to notice that the number underneath has 3 decimal places. So I'm going to write 3 decimal places in my top number as well. I added 3 zeros up there. Here's the rule with adding or with subtracting. You cannot just switch the order of the numbers. That does not work. Subtraction, you can't reverse the order of the numbers. They have to stay in that order. The first number goes on top, the second one goes on the bottom. So here I'm going to do a little borrowing. I'm going to have to come all the way over to the 8 because I can't do my 0 minus 3 and there's nothing left to borrow. So my 8's going to become a 7 and this one becomes a 10. Now I can borrow from it. So I borrow from the 10 to make it a 9 and this one becomes a 10. Same thing again here until I finally have that 10 over there. Again, that might be something you're a little rusty at. That's okay. We'll keep practicing it in class. 10 minus 3 is 7. 9 minus 8 is 1. 9 minus 1 is 8. Decimal slides down. 7 minus 5 is 2, and 2 minus 1 is 1. Again, instead of 12.87. Again, lining up and adding that decimal point, adding extra zeros, and then doing my borrowing. So now it's your turn. So I want you to pause. I want you to jot down these 3 problems, line them up, set them up, make sure you know what you're doing. When you're ready, go ahead and hit play, and you can see how I solved each of the problems and see how you did. If you got them right, then you're good. You're ready to move on. Come see me. If not, go back, give the problems a second try, and come see me if you have some questions. All right, I'm going to go through these pretty quick since you've already tried them for yourself, but the first thing I'm going to do is line up those decimal points. It's a subtraction problem, so don't forget, and then add in that extra 0. I can't do 0 minus 5, so I'm going to borrow. So my 8 becomes a 7, and this becomes a 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. 7 minus 3 is 4. Again, I can't do 4 minus 7, so I'm going to do a little borrowing. It becomes a 14. 14 minus 7 is 7, so 7.45. Here, it's an addition problem, 83.508 plus 106.9. So notice the 106.9 was written so that the decimal in the 2 numbers were to line up. It's addition. 8 plus 0 is 8. 0 plus 0 is 0. 5 plus 9 is 14. Carry the 1. Decimal is going to slide down. 1 plus 3 is 4. Plus 6 is 10. So I'm going to carry a 1 again. 1 plus 8 is 9. Plus 0 is 9. And bring down my 1. I end up with an answer of 190.408. Last one is our subtraction, where we don't have a decimal in one of our numbers, but we always know it goes at the end, the right-hand side. So this is really 14.00 minus 9.63. Again, I lined up those decimal points. Can't do 0 minus 3, and I can't borrow here, so I'm going to come all the way over here to borrow from the 4, which makes it a 3. And then this becomes a 10. Now I borrow to make that a 9, and this becomes a 10. And then I go ahead and I do my subtraction. 10 minus 3 is 7. 9 minus 6 is 3. Can't do 3 minus 9, so I do a little borrowing, and I get 13 minus 9, which is 4. I get an answer of 4.37. Hopefully you did well. If not, come see me for some help, and we'll keep practicing.